The New York Football Giants are one of the greatest franchises in the history of the NFL. And the 2019 season will mark their 95th year in existence. And over that 95 years, they've accomplished some miraculous things. Whether it be the Tyree catch, the greatest game ever played. It's been a magical 95 years to be a Giants fan. And over that stretch, the Giants have won 4 Super Bowls, 4 NFL championships, and 11 conference titles, along with sporting 20 players, coaches, or owners in the NFL Hall of Fame. But it all started a long time ago. It started in 1925. But before we get to 25, we're going to take you all the way back to 1920. In 1920, the NFL would finally open their doors to a 14-team league. But it was not the monster that it is today. There were such teams from obscure markets like the Akron Pros, the Decatur Staleys, the Rock Island Independents, the Dayton Triangles, the Canton Bulldogs. And of those 14 teams, only 2 still exist today. The Decatur Staleys actually became the Chicago Staleys in 1921. And in 1922, they became the Chicago Bears. And the 1920 Chicago Cardinals are now the Arizona Cardinals today. The Giants were actually the 4th team that is still around today to join the NFL in 1925. And before we got to 25, in 1921, the second year in the league's existence, they had experimented with a New York franchise, but it failed miserably. And back then, football played second or third fiddle. Boxing was much more popular. Baseball was much bigger with the likes of Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig and those great Yankee teams. And many thought that the NFL would not survive. As a matter of fact, college football was bigger. Notre Dame was a powerhouse. People actually believed that the college football players were better than the players in the pros. And the Giants would later disprove that, but we'll get to that in 1925. But that is when the NFL turned to New York. They said we needed a team in a big market, which is why they opened up shop in 25 for the New York Football Giants. In 1925, the New York Giants were finally established, and they were owned by businessman and bookmaker Tim Mara. Now, Tim was a businessman. He knew very little about football, but he looked at it as a way to make money. And of course, Tim Mara, passed it down later to his children, who still partially own the team today as they share it with the Tisches. But Mara bought this team for a very small investment of only $500. Of course, he would later go on to realize that didn't include much. He still had to shell out a ton of money, $25,000 actually, for uniforms, players, coaches, and everyone else, which was a ton of money back then. So it was a big gamble for Mara early on. And he suffered mightily in his first season. The Giants were not very profitable early on in their existence. As a matter of fact, they were getting killed at the box office until week 11 when the Chicago Bears came to town. And this was known as a pivotal moment in New York Giants history, with the team struggling to make money and threatening to potentially go under. The Bears came to town led by star running back Red Grange, and they were a hot ticket. And it sold out the stadium at the Polo Grounds, which of course was the stadium back then, which Mara rented out. And all 73,000 seats were filled to capacity. As a matter of fact, they had to turn away 20,000 people to watch the game. Mara had an opportunity to raise the ticket prices, but he refused to do so because he thought it was unfair to the fans. Mara had a clear strategy from the start. It was evident. He wanted to bring in quality. He wanted to bring in star talent, and he thought that it would draw people to the games. And in 25, their first season, that's exactly what he did when he brought in Jim Thorpe, who was an outstanding football player. Unfortunately for Jim and the Giants, he was in the twilight of his career at 37 years old, and he only played 1 game for the Giants before calling it quits. But that was Mara's strategy from the start. It was a quality product, and he didn't want to cheat the fans. And in his first year, he got cheated. I mean, he got absolutely destroyed, even with that Week 11 game with the Bears, which probably saved the Giants franchise. He still had to dig into his pockets and put in an additional $25,000 just to stay afloat for the following season. And things did not get easier. Mara was losing between $4,000 and $6,000 a game. He was in the red. He was having giveaways. He was giving away 5,000 free tickets a game just to fill up the stadium. He couldn't give away the tickets. Football was not what it was today. And the following year, a rival league was formed actually by Red Granger. But the league went under after 1 year, but the Giants continued to struggle in the box office, and there was fear within the organization that the team would fold. But in 27, things started to change. In 1927, Mara realized that drastic change was needed. The team was coming off a subpar season, and they were draining cash. So Mara went out, he replaced the general manager, and he told him, spend whatever needs to be spent to give us a quality football team. We need to create a winning culture. And that's exactly what he did. He went out there and he bought the best players that money could buy. And the New York Giants had a fantastic year. Now, of course, back then they didn't have championship games. That was not institutionalized until the early 1930s. The champion was awarded to the team with the best regular season record. And that year, the Giants would go on to win their first of 4 NFL titles before the merger, where they would go on to win 4 Super Bowls. They went 11-1-1, and they dominated the field. The problem for the New York Giants, though, even with all of that success, they barely broke even in the box office. They were still having giveaways. They still could not fill up the stadium. And the following year, things got worse in 28. The team suffered. They only won 4 games. But even more importantly, they had to make great reductions in cost in the things that they were doing. They could no longer have fancy plane rides and bus rides to games. They were driving broken down buses to games. They were not staying in fancy hotels. They were staying at YMCAs. The team actually had to push the bus one time for several hours when it broke down. The players were suffering from lack of sleep, and it attributed to a horrible record. And the New York Giants lost $40,000 in 1928. But Mara would not give up, even though he was draining cash. He believed in his dream, and before the 1929 season, Mara went out and he purchased the entire squad of the rival Detroit Wolverines, and he merged the two teams to create a super team for the New York Giants, including star quarterback Benny Friedman. A team which had finished in 3rd place the year before. The New York Giants went out there and they went 13-1-1. Friedman's arrival in particular boosted ticket sales. They were averaging 25,000 tickets sold a game, which was a huge improvement, which more than covered Friedman's high salary at the time, which was $10,000 a year. And for the year, the Giants finished in the green for the first time ever, where they made a profit of $8,500 as things were looking up going into 1930. For the 1930 season, Mara would transfer ownership to his 2 sons, Wellington and Jack, to insulate the team from creditors following the Great Depression. Now, of course, the father still remained heavily involved in the team's ownership. Wellington was only 14 years old. Jack was 22. And the Giants had a great year in 1930. They finished in 2nd place behind the Packers for a second straight season, finishing with a 13-4 record. But in 1930, the quality of the professional game was still in question. It was still only 6 years into the league's existence, and many still felt that college football was a better game and better players. They felt that the amateurs played with more intensity. And in 1930, in December, the New York Giants took on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish All-Stars at the Polo Grounds to raise money for the unemployed of New York City. It was also an opportunity to establish the superiority of the pro game. And the New York Giants manhandled Notre Dame in this game. And a lot of people credit this as being one of the most important games in NFL history because it gave the league a lot more legitimacy. Notre Dame was an absolute beast in college football. And all in all, the game raised $115,000 for the homeless. The 1931 season would represent a new era for the New York Giants. The New York Giants would go out there and get all-pro offensive lineman Steve Owen to be a player head coach, and he would coach the Giants all the way up until the 1953 season and would be inducted into the Hall of Fame in 1966. The Giants would go on to win 2 championships under his tenure. Before the 31 season, the Giants also went out and acquired center Mel Hine, who also played the linebacker position. He would go on to have a 15-year NFL career as a center and is still to this day the only offensive lineman ever to win the league's MVP. The quarterback Freeman would quit the team the following season in 1932 when he was told by the Giants that he would not receive any ownership with the team, and Ms. Mara said that ownership was only given to his sons. In 1931 and 32, the Giants would suffer mediocrity, going 11-12-3. The Giants then would start to progress in 1933 when they would go out and acquire a quarterback from the University of Michigan, an All-American, Harry Newman. and versatile free agent Ken Strong, the halfback. The Giants finished 11-3 and first in the Eastern Division in 1933. Newman actually led the NFL in passes completed and passing yards, as well as touchdown passes. The Giants were looking up going into the 1934 season. 1934 would prove to be a magical season for the New York Giants. In 33, the Giants had lost in the first annual NFL championship game to the Chicago Bears, where they narrowly were defeated 23-21. And in 34, the Bears were unbeaten going into the 34 championship, a chance at redemption for the New York Giants, but it was to be played at the Polo Grounds. It was an extremely cold game. Temperatures never were over 25 degrees, icy conditions. And this was known as the Sneakers Game, and it is one of the most famous games in Giants history. Because of the condition, the New York Giants were advised to go out and get special sneakers. Unfortunately, many of the stores were closed, and the Giants had to play with conventional footwear for the first half. The Giants trailed 10-3, but at the half, the Giants came out with new sneakers. The Giants went on to score 27 points in the fourth quarter, beating the Bears 30-13 and capturing their second NFL crown. After the game, offensive tackle Len Grant expressed his sincere gratitude by stating, "God bless Abe Cohen, the man responsible for getting the New York Giants their sneakers." The financial worries were starting to go away as the Giants approached the 1935 season. Not just were they dominating on the football field, but they were dominating in the box office. For several years, from the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, the Giants led the league in attendance. And one thing that is credited to Mara in the future is, at one point, the Giants were given the opportunity to take all the profits or share it with the league. And Mara thought it was for the betterment of the league to share income revenue with attendance, where he could have been greedy and taken it all for himself. And that is a big reason why the league was so successful financially and why it is as successful as it is today. Mara had all the financial struggles and he knew what it was like to go through, but rather than think about his own success, he thought about the success of the league, which is why he is an NFL Hall of Famer. In 35, the New York Giants went back to the championship for the third straight year. Unfortunately, they would fall a little bit short as they would lose to the Detroit Lions 26-7. But the Giants were such a successful team from 36 to 41, they had a collection of all-stars. They dominated the league, and in 38, the Giants would go on to win their third NFL championship as they would beat the Green Bay Packers 23-17. The Packers took an early advantage as they led 17-16. However, in the fourth quarter, Ed Dankowski threw a 23-yard touchdown pass to Hank Soar as the Giants would hold the Packers scoreless in the fourth quarter to capture their third crown. The Giants would continue to have great success in the 1940s as they would make 3 championship games between 41 and 46. Unfortunately, they would lose all 3. They lost 31-16 to the Packers in 41, 37-9 to the Bears in 44, and in 46 they would fall short 14-7 against the Packers once again as Ted Fritsch would score 2 touchdowns for the Packers and the defense would hold the Giants to just 1 score. But the success was still there. The Giants were still growing as a franchise. By the end of the 1946 season, Tim would pass down full ownership to his 2 sons. Jack controlled the business aspect while Wellington controlled the on-field operations. And it would be a new era in Giants football. Before the 48 season, the Giants had signed defensive back Emlyn Tunnell, who is the first African-American player in team history, and later the first African-American player inducted into the NFL Hall of Fame. Between 1947 and 1949, the Giants would never finish above 500. The team came back with a 10-2 record in 1950. However, they would lose to the Cleveland Browns in the playoffs. But the future was looking bright for the next quarter century.